Hello, humans. Welcome to Ethos Ananda. That's where you are. That's who I am. And today is a totally dope class on Dharma. This is not a preaching thing, this is more about philosophy and culture. And before we start, I'm going to make sure I'm live. Yes, I'm live. That's good. Um, Now I'm on a few. Okay, I gotta mute this. I don't know how to mute this. Now I'm on a few. That's good. All right, so guys, the problem is once I full screen the PowerPoint, I won't be able to easily look at comments. Oh, no, I can see the comments now on my phone here. Okay, so entering full screen now. Okay, so this is called Dharma 101, Fundamentals for Traditional Eastern Culture for Modern Western Folks. That is, modern Western folks who are interested in Dharma and the Eastern wisdom traditions. So yeah, this is not one of these like preaching things. I'm not trying to like bring my Western audience, especially people who are into like the Logos Rising movement or Peterson or anything else or Christians or whatever. You can do all of that and that's great. But you know, if you're here, you probably know that the West is just in a compost bin right now. Um, so if you are going to, follow the traditional Western approach to reality, I think that's great. Just make sure it's traditional because the modern thing is garbage. And but this is mostly tailored. This presentation is mostly for people like myself who are devotees of Krishna or Buddhist or Taoist. So they have some sort of Eastern wisdom tradition or spirituality or religion they're following, but they're Western bodied. They grew up in America. You're white, you're something like that, and you find these Eastern things fascinating, but they come from a foreign culture in a foreign time, and you're struggling how to integrate that into current day reality, which is really difficult actually. And I'll tell you right now, before we even start, the best way to learn this stuff is to go there, is to get off your bum, take a plane to Thailand or India or China or Japan, one of these Eastern or what we'll call Dharmic countries, and live there. But even that's not so easy. You can't just like go there and then like eat at McDonald's every day at a 5-star hotel. You won't learn anything that way. The best way to do it is how I did it by accident, where you're in the middle of nowhere in a small rural town. You're the only Westerner, the only white person, the only person who speaks English. You have no money in your bank account, and you have to survive, and you have to fit in to survive. And then you'll learn very quickly how people do things over there in a very beautiful, natural way. Of course, this is highly unlikely for so many people in the world, even people listening to me right now. But I'm just letting you know that's how reality works. Okay, so what else? So first we'll start with defining our terms. We're mostly just using two words today, Dharma and Logos. And I'm going to basically show how Dharma means the East, the Eastern world in its entirety. And Logos means the West and the Western culture, Western religions, all of that can be summed up in just these singular terms. Claire says Eastern religions are low status religions. Man, I'd really like to pin that to here, but I just can't enter out of full screen. But yeah, I agree, Claire. Look, if you're trying to be a high status person with, I don't know, people look up to and this and that, yeah, you don't want to be. Eastern religions are the opposite of that. They practice humility. So of course they're not going to be high status religions. And it's precisely because they are low status religions with sort of low status people in the social plane, they're actually superior when it comes to genuine spirituality and religion. And I'll be talking more about that later on. Okay, so first I'll define the terms, then I'll go into some everyday, super common, practical examples that we can all relate with so that we can actually use these terms, Dharma and Logos, in a practical way. And that's really one of the best things I can offer today is actually bringing these words into common vocabulary. Because here's the thing, when you take stupid words and you use them stupidly, which is how basically 90% of Americans live their lives, you become stupid. Whereas when you use smart words and you use them correctly, you become smart. And this is really nice. I'd highly recommend it. And yeah, so these words, they're just really practical. They're really accurate. They're really useful. And they're incredibly dense in meaning. There's so many different ways to use them, kind of like the F word. But it's this is not profane. This is the opposite of profane, using a word like Dharma or Logos. Okay. After the examples, I will go into scripture. So today, I'm just going to quote from the Bhagavad Gita, but there's so many other texts that are good when talking about Dharma. So remember, my main thesis here is that Dharma is the Eastern world. So anything by Confucius, by Lao Tzu, that's all Dharma. Those are Dharmic texts with Dharmic sages. There's Japanese examples, of course. I mean, this is what the Eastern world is. And actually, when it comes to Dharma, mundane Dharma, not Sanatan Dharma, the Hindu religion stuff that many of my devotee friends who are listening now are familiar with, that's a different thing, okay? Cultural Dharma, mundane Dharma, actually the Chinese and the Japanese are better at that than Indians. So I'd love to go into that more because that's my main interest is culture, philosophy stuff. The theology actually gets quite boring once you really know it well. Um, let's move on. So what is Dharma? Dharma is a Sanskrit word. It is basically impossible to translate into a single word in English, but there's many different translations and they can all be true in different contexts, such as duty, law, religion, form, like the essence of something. All of those can mean Dharma. Claire says, why do you assume there is no spirituality in the Abrahamic faiths? Mrs. Claire over here. I do not assume that. I know there is spirituality in these Abrahamic faiths. I'm just saying it's a lesser potency than it's often manifesting in a more religious way, in a lesser spiritual way. Whereas the Eastern religions, like Buddhism is the great example, it's lesser in religiosity and higher in spirituality. You know, most Buddhist like temples and they're not even institutions. They're just like, you go to the temple, some of them don't even have gurus. They're all just monks. They're all meditating. They're all renouncing from the world. They're just success in that realm means just like leaving the world, which is totally different from like the Catholic Church where there's a rigid hierarchy, right? From the priest to the bishop to the cardinal to the pope, and there's a lot of religiosity with that, and there's spirituality too, but the religiosity aspect is prominent. And with Muslims, with Islam, it seems like the hierarchy component is not as prominent as it is in like the Catholic Church, but the religiosity is definitely there. I mean, with the dress code and how they're right about women, and and all that stuff. Yes, and so Clara said Dharma is morality, Logos is logic. You could say Dharma means morality. You could translate it that way. It means ethics. Um, and there's parts of Logos that mean Dharma, and parts of Dharma that you can actually mean Logos too. These are in a linguistic, esoteric sense, they're almost interchangeable. But remember, what I'm focusing on now today is the cultural aspect, how we actually use these words in a daily conversation practically. And in that sense, they're very different, actually. And it's so obvious when you actually, you go to China and you live a daily life over there. There's some very basic things that are very different than the Western world. Okay, but now for today, when I say Dharma, what I'm going to be using it as, what I'm translating it as, is duty. And it's almost in this cultural sense and practical sense, it's basically replaceable with the word duty. There's a little bit more to it with Dharma than with just plain duty. Now, if you wanted you could also call it spiritual duty. That's like a very good translation that you can use anywhere when you're talking with anyone using the word Dharma. And spiritual duty is basically religion. But it just sounds better when you say spiritual duty, and it also captures more the essence of the actual word Dharma, which is more about duty than religion. Because there's mundane dharmas and there's really deep dharmas too. There's different kinds. So here's an example of how we use this word in a sentence. I'm a teacher. It's my Dharma. So here, you could just replace the word Dharma with duty, and it's fine. It works perfectly. But there's a deeper meaning added on top of that, namely, like I'm a teacher. It's my duty, but it's my Dharma means I'm referring to my constitutional fundamental duty as a being, and also how that duty of mine and that nature of mine that allows it to be my duty is what is like the guiding principle in my life. So that's how Dharma can be like a mundane thing, like, oh, this is my Dharma. What do I do in the morning? I brush my teeth. That's my Dharma. You can use it in that sense. But at any point where you use it, there's always this like additional hidden subtext underneath of like our fundamental constitutional Dharma. And this is the same with many of these other Sanskrit words like karma and yoga. And with logos, we'll see the same is happening there. I'm just going to check to see how this looks. From the world, they don't basically believe. But at any point, oh, it's not showing? Oh, I guess I can't do full screen. Oh well, this is nice. Now I can actually look at the chat comments here. So Claire says Dharma is a way of life. That's a good example, and that is what I'm referring to when I say that like the Chinese sages are dharmic. Like the Taoism is about the way, and the Tao Te Ching is the classical text showing the way to just the way, and that's the Dharma. They're almost like interchangeable completely. And yes, you could translate Dharma as moral imperative. Is Dharma also cause and effect? That's more like karma, but there's also a lot of connections between karma and Dharma. There's a reason they rhyme. Spirituality is the desire for justice. No, honey. Sorry, not really. By the way, Claire, we can chat, at the end of this if you want and go more into this. But spirituality technically means you believe in something more than material reality. That's all it means. So atoms, physical matter, okay, that's materiality, materialism. Spirituality means there's something more to it than that. The soul, God, whatever. You act your life, you live your life out based on the spirit. That's spirituality. That's it. Um, Technically speaking. Now, in our modern world, spirituality means a billion different things. For some people, it means I'm a homosexual. But I'm joking. But how you do your spirituality is also going to be vastly different if you're this kind of Christian, that kind of Hindu, whatever. There's so many different kinds. Is justice a part of it? It just depends. So, like for me, I have the law of karma acting in my worldview, acting in my reality, and that law of karma handles justice for me. So there's no desire. I mean, there is a desire for justice because I'm conditioned as an American Western man. I'm conditioned to seek out justice for myself and others, but that's faulty. According to my Dharma, this is me being an immature child, basically. And as I develop in my spiritual practice, the desire for justice gets lesser and lesser and lesser, actually. That's how I know I'm actually advancing based on my spiritual practice, my faith. What have you got against the oneness of God? I have nothing against the oneness of God. My people believe in what is called Veda. I'm going to try and spell this correctly. Achintya Veda Abeda. That means inconceivable oneness and difference at the same time. So yes, everything is one, God is one, and all that stuff. But also everything is different. I'm white, you're black, I'm tall, you're short, whatever. We are all totally different too at the same time, and we're totally one at the same time. So that's the axiom that I'm working with here. Okay, so one more thing. What is Dharma? It is the most fundamental guiding principle and identity of the Eastern world. For example, the extreme work ethic of the Japanese. That's a Dharmic culture manifest. That's Dharma. That's just a Chinese manifestation of Dharma. So you can see this manifesting in many different ways all throughout the Eastern world. And what's underneath all of it is Dharma. Moving on, what is Logos? First, how to define it. This is from Wikipedia. Logos is an ancient Greek word. You can translate it to English as speech or the word, which is a common thing, Christians will say. It also can mean reason or rationality, and it can mean proportion. Jesus Christ is known as the Logos in flesh. And so this word, so it's really interesting. So it's ancient Greek, so the word comes from Greek, but this word as it's used in English and its popularity comes entirely from the Christian world, especially from the Gospel of John, I believe it is, where that's the first word in the text. Like first there was Logos and the Logos was good. I don't know, man. I don't know it, but it's there and it's good. I don't mean to belittle it because it really is there and it's awesome. And it's, like I said, just as Dharma is the fundamental guiding principle and identity of the East, Logos is the fundamental guiding principle and identity of the West. Now, next, let's just go into a common example of how you can use this word in English, which we don't do that much anymore, but we do use this. This word logos is in many English words in different ways based on how it moved into Latin and then into English. It's a suffix in English. It shows up in weird places like logic. comes from logos. That's a cognate. It's very easy to see that, Log. Um, so here's a cool example of how to use logos in a sentence. Don't park the car on a slope. There's no logos in that. So with this example, it's a mundane daily example, and here you could replace the word logos with reason. Don't park your car on a slope. What's the reason with that? What's the reason for that? But just like Dharma, logos also hints at a deeper truth here, meaning A, there should be a reason in how we're acting in the world so that things are working nicely. We should be reasonable. And B, there is a deeper logos and reason throughout all of reality that's constantly present. And we should try to unite with that as much as possible. That's our Dharma, that's our logos, whatever. When you get to the deepest level, they get more and more interchangeable, these sorts of words. Okay. So another thing about language, logos is where we get the suffix ology, for instance, biology, psychology, and so on. Anything that ends with ology comes from logos. And so biology means the logos of bio, which means life, the rational study of life. Psychology is the study or the reason or the rational study of the psyche, of the soul, of the mind, and so on. So we all use those words all the time. And another example of how you can see logos everywhere around you in the Western world: democracy, free market, psychology, equality, the law. All of these things, which are like critical, fundamental, common things of our life, they all come from logos. This word, this concept, and what many would call this reality of logos. That's where everything comes from in the Western world, and increasingly so the modern world. Quick side note, the problem with the modern world is it's bad logos. That's all. It's either perverted logos or a lack of logos. That's what we mean when we say the modern world. And also, you could say it's bad dharma or lack of dharma, a dharma. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about dharma versus logos. So I mentioned this a little bit before. I'm going to keep going a bit, just saying that when you're at the highest level of spiritual advancement, human advancement, self-realization, self-actualization, whatever you want to call it, if you're a perfect dharmi, you follow the dharma perfectly, and you're chatting with a perfect logoser, someone who's following the logos perfectly, there's no problem, there's no conflict. These people can get together and hang out well and have great times together. There's no problem. But for the masses, it's very difficult, and there's some really critical differences that make lots of conflict happen, which I've experienced myself personally. I'll share some stories about that. So here's our first example. Your superior, your parent, your boss, whatever, your superior tells you to do something you think is stupid or you don't want to do. We've all experienced this before, unless we're saints. No, but even if you're a saint, you've experienced this before, but a saint will just kind of will ignore that feeling, that conditioned reaction that says, oh, but what about me? But I have an entitlement, blah. No, that doesn't exist. So when your boss, when your superior tells you to do something you think is stupid and you don't want to do, how can you respond to that? Well, typically, logos responds by saying, this is stupid. We must all follow the law and rationality equally. So I'm just going to do what's right because it's right. And whatever problems that happen, I will explain myself. I'll rationalize that to my boss. And, because he's rational like me, he'll say, oh, yeah, I made a mistake. And no, that's cool. You did a good job, so that's fine. Dharma says, this is my superior. It's my duty to obey, regardless of my feelings, regardless even of what's true or what's right. So if you are a conditioned Western person like myself, and you take that seriously, how Dharma and Dharmic people respond in this situation, it's very foreign. It's a totally different way of responding to reality. Um, I'm going to keep driving down some different examples so it gets more and more obvious how critically different these two worldviews are. Mr. Nice Guy, I believe that's our friend J.A., has said, life got too easy in the West. Absolutely. That is another, that's maybe even more critical with what the modern problem is. It's not so much that, I mean, well, what does modern mean? It means basically it means progressive, because the traditional way, that's the way that's worked for thousands of years. And so modern means just something going against that, which would mean progressive. Um, and the more rich you are, the more first world, more comfortable, more easier life is, the more modern you are. The best example of that I can think of is California, LA, these places where some people are just so fortunate materially, they have just such an easy life that they don't need to work hard, and they don't need to work hard, so they don't develop character, and so on and so forth. So, henceforth, we see that struggle breeds spirituality. That's absolutely correct. And even simpler than that, struggle breeds character. And when you have a nice ethos, a nice character, you can do whatever you want. You can go into spirituality more or anything else you want. Um, we're both saying the same thing there. Okay, next example. I don't like my job. We've all experienced this before, right? We all have some sort of relation to this. This is super common, practical example. So, what does Logos say? Logos says, I deserve better. I'm going to start a new career. I can fulfill any desire I have. We're all free. We're all equal. Um, it's my right. It's available to me to get a better job. So I'm going to start looking for new jobs. And yeah, that's pretty much it, right? And then Dharma will say, and this is very different, Dharma will say, it's not my place to like or not like my job. That's not actually my business. It's my business, it's my Dharma to just do my job. However, if my superiors and peers think it's a bad fit for me, then I should consider changing jobs. So, for a Dharmi, for someone following Dharma, an Eastern person, it doesn't matter if you like or don't like your job. And this is what you actually see on the ground in Indonesia, Thailand, China, whatever. There's tons of people who don't like their job. There's probably way more people like that over there than in the West. But they just get on with it. They know it's not actually their business. They're not little play toys that exist just to have fun in the world. They have dharma. They have a duty to do, and the way that duty works is you do it. You just do it. And it doesn't matter if you like it or don't like it. That's not actually a thing that becomes a prominent part of our daily consciousness as Eastern Dharmic people. It happens, like there's thoughts that go in there, but we don't focus on those things. We focus on, okay, well, yeah, I don't like it, whatever, but what do I need to do? What's the next thing I need to do and complete so that the next, and there's always a hope that as I get better at my duty, I'll be in a better position. I can, maybe I'll just get a bonus or a promotion, or I'll just be given a new job. Um, and there's a deep theological basis for that with the law of karma and so on and so forth. I could talk a bit more about how logos responds to this, but I want to keep moving. Let's just do another example. Okay, so here's, unfortunately for modern people, this isn't such a common example, but for human beings in general, this is something that will come up. You'll say, I want to get closer to God, or I want to be more spiritual, or I have no purpose in my life. It's the same thing. What is my purpose? Okay, so this is, in a general sense, yeah, this is something we are all familiar with, we all struggle with. What does Logos say, especially in terms of God and spirituality? Logos says, one, God has given us commandments in Scripture, so we must follow these as strictly as possible and study them, because this is the highest Logos, is the commandments and scriptures given to us by God, God being the originator and creator and not more than a proponent, but he's like the propagator. He's the ultimate propagator of logos throughout the universe. That's what God is to Christians and other um, Western people. Yeah, Claire said earlier, she mentioned the Abrahamic faiths, and that is yeah, that's basically right. Like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they are all pretty much logos based Western religions. Even though they come from the Middle East, now that's all part of the West, pretty much. Islam is a little special. There's a little bit more Dharma in Islam than the other two. Um, Anyway, let me just finish the example here. So that's what Logos says. I'm just going to follow the laws and the scriptures as best as I can. And but Dharma says I must seek out a spiritual master and submit myself to him. So here's, once again, it's a critical difference. So in practice, it may be subtle, it may be hard to see, because you go to your guru and your guru says, all right, read this Bible, follow everything in the Bible. So that practice is logos. That's a logos practice. But underneath it, the reason why we're acting in the world for Eastern people, it's because this is my master. I have a real person, and it's my duty to obey the master. That is actually how he's living his life. Whereas a logos person, a Western person, is saying the law is the master, the word is the master, the reason, the rationality is the master. And that master has many mouths. Maybe one day it's this teacher, one day it's another teacher, or this priest, or that movie, or that book, or whatever. It's the thing underneath it, the rationality underneath it, that I submit myself to as a Western person following logos. And that's fine. That's really good. Like I said, this isn't like a battle. Like I write here Dharma versus logos. It's not like there's a winner or something. It's just these are the two, as history has evolved over thousands of years, this is what's been happening, where you have these two very excellent worldviews, but they have their differences. Um, okay, Mr. Nice Guy says, neither approach is correct regarding jobs. Sometimes you got to suck it up, and sometimes you have the luxury of being able to jump to something different if you've got a safety net. I've done both. Yes, me too, in terms of practical experience. I've done both. And this is a very mundane example. So for a lot of people, it's really just kind of come down to the particular circumstances, how much money you got, where you live, who you know, this sorts of things. But because I'm trying to show the guiding principles underneath this. So if you can imagine, I guess hypothetically, in an ideal situation, a dharmi, an Eastern person who's in a situation of being able to easily jump to another job if they don't like their current job, they'll still be hesitant to do that because they have a relationship with their coworkers and their boss, which is much deeper than for Western people. And so I have a good example of this from Thailand. Um, and so there's a barrier, there's like a wall, there's a threshold, there's a block that will stop a properly functioning healthy Eastern person from just, all right, I'm going to another job. They have to prepare something first. Even if they commit to doing that and it's the right thing to do, whatever, they still need to do it in a way that doesn't bother the social relationships, the social fabric of society. You could also call it collectivism, but that's part of Dharma too. So, for example, I was in Thailand, and the way it works in Thailand is um, this happened while I was teaching there at the school. One of the teachers left. He found another job somewhere else. And he talked about it like very mysteriously with other coworkers. And, I heard about it from another guy who heard about it from another guy. And, but he didn't want to tell the principal. He like made up the decision, but he still didn't tell anyone. And then one day he just didn't show up at school. He just like he was gone without a warning. Now that's just how the Thais have figured out a good way to do this because um, I will rationalize that um, because the shame and the possible losing face and problems of saying, all right, I'm leaving, I'm going to a new job. Here's my 2 weeks. There's a lot of problems with that, which is namely, oh, it starts a conversation like, oh, why? Why are you leaving? That's what your principal, the boss will tell you. This place isn't good for you. And then it's shame for you, shame for them. It's a whole thing. And so one way the Thai culture has figured this out is you just book it in the middle of the night. That's how one Dharma culture has solved this issue. And I'm sure it's so different in so many other places. Like in China and Vietnam, they're quite different. They're very direct, very blunt, very in your face, frank and honest. So they wouldn't like that because they just want, it's their duty to just do their job as best they can. So if they need time to prepare to hire someone else, um, if that's part of their duty, it's your part of your duty to respect their duty. So you know, in China, in Vietnam, it doesn't matter. You can say, "Oh, I'm leaving," whenever you want, and they may not even have a conversation about it because it's not so much their duty in a different sense. This is getting really confusing. I mean, this will just take way much. It'll take a lot of detail to go into those cultural differences. Because, like, so when I went from Thailand to Vietnam, that was actually the only time in my life that I had culture shock. And I've been everywhere. I've been to Russia, Sweden, Canada. I don't know. I've been all sorts of random places. But just going from one neighboring country to another neighboring country in the same region, those cultures were so different. I actually had culture shock for a day or two, maybe a week, because they're both Dharmic countries, but the Thais have this huge focus, much like the Japanese, on politeness, respect, etiquette, etc. And the Vietnamese are the opposite. They say, man, you got to tell me whatever it is to my face. Tell me I'm fat. Tell me I'm ugly. Whatever. If you don't do that, you don't respect me. It was totally different, which I prefer. Like I prefer that sort of honesty to these super polite cultures, but because I fit in so well in Thailand, and I assimilated so thoroughly that it just shocked me. Okay, this is interesting. In Indonesia, nice guy has had the opposite experience there. The teachers leave after giving notice and it never gets brought up. But many Indonesians can be evasive to save the face. Yeah, that's exactly what I'd expect from my short time in Indonesia and my other just as you travel more and you study things more and you meet more different kinds of people, you start to get a better map of the cultural territory of humanity, basically. Um, anyway, moving on. Okay, so now I'm just going to talk about cultures in general. We're moving on from mundane daily examples to just like a dharmic culture versus a logos culture. So, dharmic cultures basically say this is their belief: the universe is eternal, and there's this great wheel of dharma, of all the actions of all the living entities that are constantly spinning around. So, people in dharmic cultures, they say it's my I have to find my tiny little place within this great big wheel, this great big hole, this great cosmos, and I do my part so everything flows nicely, so that the whole is maintained. And as long as I'm a part of that whole, even if it's a tiny, tiny, minuscule, super humble little part, as long as I'm a part of it, I'm safe, I'm in bliss, I'm happy, everything's good. Logos cultures and people in them will say in general, whatever this reality is, I must understand it as best as I can. I must study this reality and find the logos in it, find the rationality in it, find the natural laws, find the laws between people, the laws I make for myself. I have to understand and rationalize things as much as possible, and in that way I can master my own reality, or this reality that I'm experiencing, as best as I can. And when I have understanding and mastery via logos, via rationality, speech, and study, and etc., once I have that, I get everything that I really want and need, which is happiness, security, peace, um, purpose, and meaning in my life. Everything is fulfilled. So one of the main differences there is that so Dharmic cultures, as you would expect from that one little brief few sentences I just mentioned, you would expect that they would be great for having a spiritual culture, and you would expect that they'd be bad for creativity, independent thought, philosophy, entrepreneurial things, technology development, and that's exactly what we see in the world. You know, Dharmic people in China and Japan, they're in their factory, they do their little job, and that's it. And they're happy with that because they're part of the whole, and the whole takes care of them. So if you ask them to do one tiny little thing that's outside of their tiny little worldview, world frame, they seize up, and their body actually goes into convulsions, which I've seen many times with my students. Part of my job is to get them to speak a new language from another culture, and part of that means using words and thinking in a different way. So there have been a few moments where, instead of asking them, yes or no, this, yes or no, and they say, yes, teacher, no, teacher, and I instead ask them for like an open-ended response in their own personal opinion. Sometimes they just freak out. Part of it's shyness, but they're not shy when they're I ask them to do what they're used to answer, what they're used to answering. But when I ask them to do some things that are more creative or requiring independent thought or logos, they just like freak out. They physically freak out because it's just so different a mode of reality for them. And likewise, logos cultures, as we see in reality now in America and Europe for centuries, Westerners are really great at like developing technology, entrepreneurial things, philosophy. The evolution in philosophy is incredibly um, advanced in the West. Now, I would also say the There's been a devolution in wisdom in the West. That's a different thing. But as far as like the technical aspects of philosophy and anything else, anything that's like technical where you need to study it and find the law behind it, that's logos. So Western cultures and Western people are naturally good at that. You can, and it's so deeply bred into us that, like I said, with children, you notice it. You know, this is what American children are like starving for because their teachers tell them, "Oh, just follow in line and just do what I tell you." So when myself as a substitute teacher, I go in there and I say, "No, I want to hear your opinion on this. Let's just pretend we don't know something about this and we're going to figure it out from scratch. Like, how does this work and what's this and how does that fit with that?" They get so excited. Like, "Oh my God, I can't wait to work on this. I love this teacher. I get to be myself. I get to do all this stuff." That's because they're Western. They come from a logos culture. It's in their DNA. It runs really deep. Moving on. Okay. So that's good enough for the for a difference in Dharma versus Logos. Okay, so now I'm gonna share some critical, essential verses from the Bhagavad Gita that show Dharma very simply, very absolutely, what Dharma really is. And then, once again, we're going to go through some common examples and reactions that we as Westerners will say that is why it's so difficult for us to live dharmically. So this is Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, verse 48, quote, "Be steadfast in yoga, O Arjuna. Perform your duty and abandon all attachment to success or failure. Such evenness of mind is called yoga." So this is one of my favorite verses mainly because Krishna here is saying explicitly, this is yoga. He's actually defining that term super explicitly. And yoga, according to how we've been talking so far, yoga is essentially the practice of Dharma. That's basically what it is. That's what it is in the Gita. That's what it is culturally. And based on how I'm using this word so far, that's all yoga is. It's the practice of Dharma, the continual practice of Dharma. That's yoga. Okay. So now I'm going to break it up word by word and and show you why it's just how difficult this is for Western people to not only wrap their heads around, but actually live your life according to this stuff. It goes against the fibers in our being. So the first part here, be steadfast in yoga. Okay, that's already like really difficult for most of us because we're thinking, how can I be steadfast? The world is constantly changing. That's the logos of the reality we live in. Things change. So as a Westerner, I'm thinking, all right, I need to be constantly studying everything around me, seeing how things change, staying updated with everything around me. So how can I pick one thing and just focus on that one thing with disregard to everything else? I don't know. I mean, it's basically like the more logos based you are, the more it's just you can't wrap your head around this stuff. Anyway, the next one, perform your duty and abandon all attachment to success or failure. The logos says, how can I act without desiring success and avoiding failure? How can I act in the world at all? What's the point? What's the logos? What's the rationality in acting if there's no success? If there's no achievable end? Why should I act? If there's no cake, if there's no success, and if I'm not motivated by at least by like avoiding failure, how can I act? What to speak of actually having a duty and doing it? How can I act in the world? And well, this last part, that's just another sentence in here. He's just defining the term yoga here. Um, but there's still this idea of evenness of mind. We know that it's the logos of the mind to not be even, to be crazy, to be sporadic all over the place. And our Western um, conditioning tells us to take that craziness and focus it on I don't know, creating something really cool. Like look at Nikola Tesla. You know, he didn't have evenness of mind. He had the most crazy mind ever, and we worshipped him. We still worship him today. And he was, you know, this many geniuses are like this. They're known specifically for not having evenness of mind. And yet, Krishna and Confucius and the Buddha and all these great Eastern wisdom proponents, they tell us you gotta give that up. You gotta go completely against this idea of like exceptionalism and excellence by any means necessary. You have to just be cool, be even, be in the middle, be detached from everything. This is Dharma, and it's a totally opposite way of living. Moving on, we're in chapter 3, verse 35. Quote, "It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though they may be faulty, than another's duties. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty, is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous." Unquote. This is a God, this verse is incredible, and it's just so hard to actually live your life according to this. Like, even Easterners, even Dharmic people, really struggle with this one. This is why it's in scripture, because this is like the absolute principle that you can't change from it at all. So, the first part here, we have to do our duty rather, even if we do it bad, rather than doing another's duty. So logos, our Western conditioning will say, look, I just want to get the job done. I want to make everyone happy. So if someone else is struggling, well, I should help them. It's the right thing to do to help others, and they'll probably thank me, and everything will be better. We'll finish the job faster. And this is how we're conditioned in school, right? Oh, your classmate is struggling. Go over and help your classmate, you know? Um, it's not good or bad. I mean, I'm just trying to point out the differences here. Um, we'd all agree that we should, help those who are suffering. But when it comes to duty, you absolutely should not, according to the Bhagavad Gita and Dharmic cultures. And this is one of the problems I had uh, living in the East is, and you can see videos of this in China of like horrible things like someone's like getting raped or kidnapped and beaten in public, and people like walk right next to it and they just keep walking. They don't even like recognize it. And of course, in Western countries, the tiniest little thing can go wrong, and people, oh my, how can I help you? I'm here for you, and all this stuff. It's a totally different way of living. Um, so the Chinese and other Dharmic Eastern people are thinking, it's not my duty to help someone else. If they're my family, I'll help them. If I know them, I'll help them. But if not, it's not my duty. There's someone else who does that sort of thing. They have their own family. There's police, there's firemen, there's medical people, there's cameras now and automatically like I don't have to do anything about this. It's not my duty. And this is hard to grasp, it's hard to stomach. But when you really commit to dharma, to just doing your duty and only your duty, regardless of how you feel, and even regardless of what's right or not right, this is how you'll actually act in the world, the way normal atheistic secular Chinese people act, or Japanese or Thai or Vietnamese, whatever. These are all dharmic countries. So because of thousands of years of history and DNA, etc., verses like this in the Bhagavad Gita, you are more likely to find people in the East actually living their life according to this verse and this principle than you will find in a Hare Krishna temple in America, for instance, where you'll find people wearing, doing the Hindu thing on the, the eye. They go, oh, I'm dressing Indian, I'm eating Indian. Look, I can eat with my hands. Wow. They're doing all this like superficial cultural stuff, but the Dharma underneath everything, what it's all based off of, it's hard to find that stuff. In it's hard. I haven't found it easily in Western Krishna devotees and other people, yogis, people who like, are spiritual and they like do yoga all the time. Like they're doing all this Eastern stuff from a Western logos based perspective. So that there's still a fundamental switch that needs to take place in order to get to that next level of advancement, which we all are looking for. That's what I'm looking for. Mr. Nice Guy says more people in the West would have more fulfilling lives if they were content with just a full belly, family, church on Sunday, and a roof over their head. Man, brilliant. Could not agree more. The thing I like and got used to with the Chinese is that to them, it's even less than that. Just a rice, just a belly of rice is enough. I've actually seen, really poor people on the side of the street in China fighting with each other and, just having a bad life. And then someone gives them just a plain bowl of white rice and they're just like, they glow and they're in bliss and they forget all their problems and they eat together and talk together. And for the next like 5 hours, they just forget about all their suffering. Just a full belly alone is enough. And that's not a Chinese thing. This is a Dharmic thing. Anyone who's following the Dharma can experience this. When you have lots of practice and habits and character, this eventually turns into character of doing only your duty and being content with only that, then you don't need as much random stuff to feel happy. You can run on first gear. You don't need to go on fifth gear to do anything you need to do. All right, so I have so many stories I'm going to share about this one because it's so important. Just a few weeks into moving into Thailand for the first time, I did very little research. I bought a one-way ticket, and before I knew it, I was in a really small town in the middle of nowhere in Thailand. Even the local Thai people at the nearest city didn't hear about the town where I was living in. They'd never heard about it. So I was in the teacher's lounge, and before class, I would make a coffee, an instant coffee with the water cooler over there, and this became a super important part of my daily routine because teaching was really hard there, and this one little coffee made a big difference for me. So one day I go in the morning, the water's out, and I see just down, 10 meters, 10 yards down the road there. There's extra water, jugs. So at that time I did know that someone else had their duty to fix it. I'm a teacher. I'm a foreigner teacher. It's not my job to replace the water cooler, but I just needed that darn coffee, and it would be a huge hassle to like, who do I ask? Who do I talk to? Are they gonna actually the thing for me I was thinking is I think at the time I did know who the secretary was who would do it, but I knew what would happen. He would just smile and say, "Oh yeah, I'll do that," and then he just wouldn't do it. He would wait like hours or days even to do this. So I just stood up. I went over there. I brought the water. I brought it back down, and it was a whole thing. You got offended. Oh my God! I can't believe. What are you trying to do? You trying to do my job for me? They all got offended. The coworkers there who were just looking as bypasses at this instant. They were really disturbed. And there was another foreigner teacher I was working with there, he was a Kiwi, a New Zealander. He's been living in Thailand for years, has a Thai wife and child, and he explained it to me like you just can't do that. That's what we call farang ding dong. That's a ding dong crazy foreigner way of acting, which is just inappropriate. It's adharmic. It could be totally fine in the West, but in even in no offense, but Thailand is not super advanced. It's a second world country, second world economy, and it's a second world culture too. You go to India, China, Japan, they're a lot more sophisticated culturally in these countries, and they're in some situations far more offended when you make a mistake like this. So, for example, in Japan and pretty much anywhere in Asia, there's no tipping. You just even in Europe, you don't tip most places. That's more like an American thing. But in Japan, it's so important that you don't tip that you can be arrested if you try to tip. Because why? What's the reason for this? What's the logos for this? Well, it's Dharma. So someone has a duty. So, okay, so it's like this. You pay a taxi driver $10 to take you to where you need to go. So that price, $10, there's someone that's not you decided what that price is, and you agreed on that price. So that's what you pay. Anything more or less than that is not only wrong, it goes against your agreement, but you're also in effect saying that I'm going to take the place, I'm going to do someone else's duty for them. I'm going to say, oh, well, I have my own reasons to pay a different price, and I'm more important than this other person who thought of their price. There's so many other reasons why this is offensive in Japan. I mean, if you go to like a craft store, someone makes something by hand and they've been doing it in their family for 500 years, and and you agree on a price, and then after that you give them a little extra, it's so offensive. It's like there's so much meaning behind it, which is bad. Like, why would you do that? You think they're poor? You're giving them charity? Um you like you, this is one part about me that I've gotten so dharmic in the sense that I have to actually struggle to think of all those rationalization because it bothers me because I don't want to receive tips, just as I don't want to give tips anywhere. Like if I do something for someone and they give me a tip on top of that, I just feel really weird about it now because I've been fully converted by this dharmic um, aspect, dharmic reaction or direction or outlook on how to look at tipping. Um, it's like, what are you trying to say, man? By tipping, why? Because you're so rich? Why would you do that? Where's the logos in it? Where's the dharma in it? So this is a bad example because it's bad across the board. It's bad logos and bad dharma, which is why it's only in America and nowhere else, because America's very degraded across the board. If you look into the history of it, you'll see that it's still illegal in America to tip many times and places. And it was a scam. The whole reason it started was one guy wanted to scam another group of guys to make a bunch of profit. Next, oh, here's a funny story. I was in Vietnam, and there was a PhD economics professor from America who just recently moved there. And he lived in Vietnam longer than I did for years. He studied Vietnamese in school, and but he hadn't been there in a while. We're in a restaurant together, and he raises his hand, and he starts yelling out some word I'm not familiar with to grab the waitress's attention. So I just me and my friend, we're just looking at him like, what are you doing? And we just wait. He keeps calling, nothing happens. I said, hey man, what are you trying to do? And he's like, oh, I'm trying to call, the attention of the waitress. It's a very specific, polite word, blah, 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 blah. This is definitely the right word to use. I say, oh, really? Okay. Am I? That's it. As soon as I didn't even get to the second syllable, and she scurries over. Yes, how can I serve you? Because so what was the problem here? He was in logos. He was in a stale logos state where he knew the rules. He knew by the book it must be like this. But I knew I was living in reality, not so much logos or dharma. I was just living in reality, and I knew that in this place where we were, with this dialect that people use, with my experience actually living in restaurants for a few months by that time, there's a very simple thing you do to get their attention. Is it correct or not correct? Is it good logos or bad logos? I don't care. Most Dharmic Eastern people, we don't care. We just do what we need to do to get what we need. That's Dharma. It's duty. We just do what we need to do, period. So another benefit of living in a Dharmic culture is you're super practical and down to earth and grounded in reality. When you only focus on what you need to do and you don't have these embarrassing experiences like my friend who had a PhD and like all this like, oh, I've studied Vietnamese in the university and blah, blah, blah. But when it comes down to actually doing something in reality, you just failed. He failed miserably. And the other friend I was hanging out with in the restaurant, he was a construction guy. He had no experience teaching, no experience in Vietnam. But as soon as this thing happened, we looked at each other like he knew just as much as I knew. This guy's a moron. This guy's just making an ass out of himself. And it's one thing to make an ass out of yourself when you don't have a PhD and fancy things behind you. But if you're making an ass out of yourself and you have all this experience and puffed up qualifications and all, that's even worse. It actually makes it worse. All right, and then there's another common example. You can see this in the news. In Thailand, there are some roads that are really bad. There's some potholes that just stay bad forever. And I saw this one picture of this white guy in flip-flops cleaning up the pothole. He actually went to the local store, got some cement or whatever to fill in the pothole. And this was like a big news headline, like dirty foreigner thinks he's better than us, tries to clean the roads. And yeah, this is just super offensive and not a good thing to do. You can't do this in the Dharma culture. It's offensive. It's really, really offensive because this is not a superficial offense. This is actually a fundamental offense because they base their whole reality and worldview on duty and Dharma. And it's easy for us Westerners to justify, like, I mean, this guy, this white guy, I mean, he has so much higher income than the locals. He has so much more free time. And, he just wants a good road. He wants to help out. He can do it. He does it. I mean, it's a no-brainer. For us Westerners, it's a good thing to do. It's a no-brainer. But I hope, my whole point of doing this this class today is to show, hopefully show how fundamental these differences are. It's not just small things. My mouse stuff. Okay. So the next one, destruction in our duty is better than engaging in another's duties. So Logos would say, how can it be good for me to face my own destruction when I could just take a moment and help my peer? Destruction is bad. Success is good. Like, what am I missing here? If I can just help someone else, or I do what they're supposed to do for a little bit, the project becomes successful. They're happy because they're probably going to be happy because I helped them. They were struggling, and now they can go on to the next thing they want to do. I help them. I get to feel good. I help someone, and we finish the project better. Like, this is, everybody wins. It's a success. But what Krishna is saying here is that even even if you help someone else and you do it well, and oh, got got word juggled. So, well, what he literally says, if you just do your own duty really bad and you see someone else do their duty really well, that's fine. That's just what you live with. If you do your duty really poorly, they do it even more poorly. Like whatever it is, as long as you do your own duty, that's actually what we define success as in Dharma cultures. Um, and once again, this is just really hard to see until you're actually living in the East in a Dharma culture for a long time. And on that note, ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Hindu temples, Buddhist temples, yoga studios, all these Eastern things in the West, they're not Dharmic cultures. They're not Dharmic. They're Eastern practices done by Western people in a Western way. So you don't actually have experience of seeing these sorts of things in action. You have to actually go to a Dharmic culture. Now, I'm sure there are some little places here and there where they're doing the Dharma nicely, but in my experience, there's very few and far in between. I've done judo. Uh, there's Eastern martial arts places all over the place where you can, but most of the time it's just martial arts. People are just go there to work out, or they have their own logos for whatever they're doing, and it's just totally different than where these things come from, how it's actually practiced in Japan, China, etc. So yeah, fundamental difference. It's like our Western idea of success is failure to the East, and the Eastern idea of success is failure to us. It's a clear contradiction here, culturally. Um, okay, so I got more stories here. All right, so when I was teaching in Asia, um, what I learned quickly is that the dharma of the teacher is very different in the East than the West. But in the East, the teacher's job is mostly to be a second parent, meaning to cultivate good character and behavior in the students. And secondarily, it's to actually teach them how to like do math or whatever. And even still, even that secondary dharma to teach them whatever academic stuff, even how you do that is even more minor because your job isn't actually to get them to learn, it's to instruct them. You just say, all right, go to page 2, do this. That's actually your job as a teacher in the East. So if you just like, if you get them to be good people and fall and obey you and practice the Dharma, and you give them instructions to do 10 pages for homework and this and that, and the students don't do it at all, they fail, they don't even do it or whatever, you did a good job as a teacher. That is how Dharma is defined most what Eastern countries, especially Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, that's really what your Dharma is as a teacher, especially of children. Like if you're just like if you're handsome, you're well dressed, and the children are happy and they're polite and well behaved, you did a good job. You get a bonus, you get a promotion. Like that is your Dharma most of the time. And I was not living like that. I still don't to a degree where I really, when to me, teaching means getting them to learn. So I struggled with this so much. Um, and I tried too hard. I had high expectations and I failed. And so eventually I had severe back problems, chronic pain. Um, and from teaching just the first few months in Thailand. And but I had to keep coming up to work and I couldn't move. I was literally had trouble walking. That's how bad it was at some point. And so I did the only thing I knew how to do to help my back get better, which is yoga. So I started just doing some like, stretching yoga at the school, like out back, outside of the classroom or whatever. And they totally did not like it. They would either make fun of me or be really angry at me for going against the Dharma of a man. So this is even more fundamental. Like a man can't do something like yoga in public. He has to be like, tough and just like suck it up, whatever it is. So I got in trouble for that. I also got in trouble when I was talking to one of my students. Once again, this is at the same school in Thailand. Because in these like 3 or 4 months, I learned everything about Dharma in those 3 months. That's all it took. After that, everything got easier and better, and it just because it was a crash course. I learned it so quick. I had no choice. I had to learn it. Otherwise, the people would keep making fun of me, uh, being angry at me, or being offended by all of my just normal basic actions. I can't live like that. So I had to learn it. So I was talking to one of my fourth grade students. She was actually also the daughter of the hotel owner where I was living. And we were just talking, and as a joke, I started to pretend to cry. I wasn't crying. I was making fun of someone else who cries or something. And she was so furious about that. This little girl, she started scolding me. She said, "You don't cry. You're a man. Men don't cry." And this is just so incredible, right? Like, first of all, the balls on this, the bravery of this girl to stand up to an older man, but it's coming from a place of love. I instantly got that. Like she really wanted me to fit in with everyone else. And there's that famous axiom: the nail that sticks out is the first one to get hammered down. I think that's from Japan, Japanese proverb. This is how it actually works in these cultures. These aren't just like fancy words that sound cool. Like they live their life according to this stuff. And so when you're in a Dharma culture and you see someone doing something different, it bothers you because remember, you're a tiny little spoke in the whole wheel. And so when there's another spoke that's wrong with the whole wheel is going to have problems. So um, these are typically the times when people will actually sacrifice their own pleasure or whatever to help others. But it's still for a greater good. It's to maintain the great wheel of Dharma, which is their own duty, which is everyone's duty anyway. So they're technically not actually going against their own duty in those situations. Yeah, that's basically it. Um, no, I have some. Okay, and then the last phrase. Oh my God, phrase by phrase. There's so much here. So to follow another's path is dangerous. So Logos says, I should research all available paths and choose the best one, simply because it's the best. Besides, if my path is really great, I hope others would follow it. But here, Krishna is saying, and this is what you see in Dharma cultures, you just can't do that. You can't follow anyone else's path. It's for the same reasons mentioned above. Destruction is better than doing that. It's better to just destroy yourself in your own duty. That's actually better. Now, one implication of this is that you might think, oh, well, if I can't follow another's path, I can't have any role models. If I can't follow another's path, what do I model myself after? And it's true. Easterners do not have role models. They just don't. Like, we take it for granted that as young children growing up in the West, we all have a hero. For me, it was like Jim Carrey, Michael Jordan, Bruce Lee. Like these guys were my second father. I never met them in person, but their example was so great, and I would base my whole life off of trying to be like them to great success. In the case of Jim Carrey, I became a real funny guy real quickly. But yeah, most like when I ask my Chinese students, who their role model is, they just look at me with like in total confusion, like, what? What's a role model? Why would I have a role model? I mean, I like this guy, I like that guy, I like Taylor Swift, she makes good music, but I follow my parents, you know, like I follow my parents, I follow my teacher. Most of the time, it's actually their teacher. That if you ask them like, who do they really like and want to follow, a lot of them will just simply say my teacher because that's Dharma. That's what they're trained to do. That's the culture they live in. So there is no space. There's no psychological space to like have a role model. How, if that means having a role model means they're more important than your parent or teacher, which let's be honest was totally true for me as a kid growing up, and it was probably true for you if you're a white American listening to this now. That's adharmic. That's not okay. For logos, it's fine though because you know that's why Jesus Christ is this great figure because he's like the ultimate superhero, and that's why people can worship him so nicely. It's because he embodies like the ideal role model so well. And anyone else that you happen to like, Michael Jordan, whatever you think, as long as they can embody what virtue that you want to follow, everyone's okay with that. Your parents will say, "Oh yeah, wow, he is great. Yeah, yeah, no, he's great. You should follow him because he's great, and you want to be great. That's great." Like we don't even think about it. It's a different culture. It's a fundamentally different culture. Moving on, Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 34. Quote, people will always speak of your infamy, and for one who has been honored, dishonor is worse than death. Once again, this is a very strong, absolute verse from Krishna. I mean, this it's absolute. Like there's this it looks exaggerated, but it's not. One reason it's not is because I'll tell you from personal experience, I've been honored, like some of the most honorable people I've ever met. Actually, typically that's how it works for me, was most people think I'm like, they don't get me or they think I'm weird. And then some people who are like kind of honorable, I kind of look up to them, they go, oh yeah, you're not bad. And then I meet an actual master who's like the most honorable person I've ever met. And they go, wow, you can really be one of the best students I've ever met. That's just been my experience. And so when you have honor like that and someone dishonors me, anyone dishonors me like strongly, I would definitely rather die. Like it's not even close. It's not even close. That's for me as a Westerner, just as based on my Western conditioning before even going to Asia, this is how I was like. Anyway, so Logos responds to this in one of two ways. Logos would say, A, nothing is worse than death. So how could dishonor? Nothing. I mean, death is the end. So how can something be worse than death? Or B, Logos can say, yes, what's the point of living if I can't live well? And honor is like the whole point of living. And so Logos has two responses. This is basically good Logos versus bad Logos. So if you're into like Lord of the Rings and the great mythical kings, King Arthur, and like you have this is your logos and you have a hero you're trying to embody, and you see in these stories that the heroes, they take honor so seriously and they'll happily die in battle for honor, then that's logos, and that's dharma too, and that's fine, you know but I think what might be a more common reaction from modern Western people today to this verse is, I mean, like, first of all, we don't even know what honor means anymore. The word honor is not in common vocabulary usage anymore in American English. What to speak of logos? Logos is way deeper and more useful and more profound than honor. So anyway, people might be thinking, oh, dishonor means, oh, I'm just a little embarrassed or something. How can that be worse than death? Well, I'd say you don't understand honor. Your honor is your worth. It's who you are as other people see you. So if you are, so one thing that can happen is you see yourself in high esteem and everyone else sees you as crap. I mean, that's going to be really crappy. I guess the opposite would be you see yourself as really low and everyone else sees you as very high. Well, that's the life of the saint. And it doesn't mention that here, like dishonoring yourself maybe is good, and being honored by others is good. Anyway, whatever. I'm going to check for some more comments. Nope, everybody gone. They gone. Okay, so that's it for now. Thanks for coming. I will be probably going into some more advanced topics on Dharma because I know there's demand for it, especially for, like I said, Western people following Eastern wisdom traditions. If you think you can just, do these, you put on, a yoga outfit and you do yoga 3 times a week, and now all of a sudden you're enlightened or you're some Eastern person. You're not. That's not how it works. There's fundamental differences that you have to struggle with, you have to understand. And even after doing that, you're still going to fail. But you might as well know the truth. This is the truth. Dharma is east, logos is west. And when you get that these two words do fully, exhaustively, completely explain everything culturally and philosophically, and you see where you are in that spectrum, then you can actually act appropriately in the world, which many people do not. That's one reason we have so many problems in our modern society. People don't know their place in the world. They don't care about knowing their place. And so they go encroaching on other people's duties, doing their work for them, not even doing their own work well. There's all these different problems coming up constantly. Speaking mostly about America, urban cities in America especially are full of problems. There's a reason why there's problems everywhere, just like there's a reason why in a city of 14 million people like Chengdu in China, there's effectively zero violent crimes every year. It's not a statistic. They're not lying. It's just you look around, there's no ghetto, there's no violence, there's no conflict. People are happy all the time because they have a culture. They have a culture based off Dharma, which is 5,000 plus years old. They know how to do it. They've been doing it for thousands of years. They just continue doing it, and it's going to keep working for them. And our little super progressive, independent, individualistic, modern Western ethos will fail. It's already failing. It's already failed. It will continue to fail. There must be a way out. And I've been speaking a bit on some of those ways out. For me, the way out is ethos and Dharma. I don't care about logos at all anymore. Personally, I just don't even care about it at all. But ethos has a lot of logos in it. Ethos is still pretty Western. The idea of having a role model with great character, and you try to embody that and cultivate your own character. This aggressive approach to development is very Western, even though it's not really logos, it's different, it's ethos. That can work for anyone. So if you're in America like me and you see all the problems happening in the world and you just say, I'm going to forget about even what's the right thing to do and justice and all these big things, and you say, I'm just going to be the best person that I can be, that will work. It will totally work. You can maintain your Western identity. You can even take on an Eastern identity. It'll be easier actually to do Dharma and Eastern things if you just have really good ethos. So for that, you can read my book on ethos and other live streams and things I've done about ethos. I write essays or ethical essays a lot on my website, ethosananda.com/blog. If you hit me up with a message, I can send you my book for free because I'm going to publish a second edition. So the first one is no longer available now. Sorry for that. It's mostly because of copyright issues. I'm not in trouble. I just want to do it perfectly. Okay, that's all, everyone. Stay human. Don't be subhuman. Stay wise. See you next time. Ethos Ananda out.